They said the island did not exist by morning. Fishermen swore they'd never seen it at dawn. Sailors marked their maps and returned to find only sea. But every evening, just after the last sliver of sun kissed the horizon, the island would shimmer into view, wrapped in mist, glowing faintly like a memory half remembered. No one knew its name. On ancient nautical charts, it was sometimes scribbled in faded ink as Isola Nocturna, the night island. But for Maren, it had another name, home. She did not know how she came to live in the lighthouse perched on its jagged cliffs. The earliest thing she remembered was the sound of waves whispering stories to the rocks and the smell of salt in her sheets. She lived alone, though it didn't feel lonely. The lighthouse pulsed with a warmth that felt alive. Its great crystal lamp, suspended like a moon in glass, needed no fuel. It glowed with its own quiet will. Each night she climbed the spiral stairs to tend the lamp, though there was nothing to tend. She polished its brass base. She whispered to it, and it shone as if glad to see her. The island was small, a few stone paths, wind-blown grass, and gulls that spoke in riddles. Beyond the lighthouse stood a grove of silver trees whose leaves did not rustle but hummed in harmony with the tides. Maren often sat beneath them with her notebook sketching shapes she'd seen in dreams. A doorway beneath the waves, a key made of stars, a ship with no sails but wings. One evening as she finished her tea and wrapped herself in a shawl, the lighthouse flickered. Just once, a single shivering blink. She froze. The lamp had never faltered before. Another blink. Then a sound low and far off, like the distant groan of something ancient shifting beneath the sea. Maren stood heart-tapping fast. She opened the door to the tower and stepped into the wind. The island was quiet. The sky a velvet blue. The sea endless. And then she saw it. Out past the cliff where no land should be a light blinking. Once. Then again. A pattern. It was answering her lighthouse. She had never seen another signal in all her nights. Her knees softened with awe. Or fear. For the first time, she wondered, was someone trying to find her? Or was something calling her home? The silver trees trembled. The gulls grew silent. And in the distance, the answering light pulsed again. Maren stepped closer to the cliff's edge, her hand gripping the cold iron rail. She would wait. She would watch. And tomorrow, when the island faded with the sun, she would try something no one had dared before. She would stay awake. The morning did not come. Or perhaps it came and passed, veiled behind a curtain. Maren could no longer pierce. She had stayed awake. Wrapped in her thickest shawl, she sat atop the lighthouse steps all through the night, clutching a notebook she had not dared open. Her eyes followed the distant, blinking light, rhythmic, patient, almost deliberate. It never came closer. It never faded. She had expected the island to vanish, as it always did, melting like mist beneath the rising sun. But now the sun refused to rise. The sky hung in a permanent shade of midnight blue, as if caught between dreaming and waking. The stars, too, had changed. Some pulsed in strange constellations she could not name. Others twirled slowly like lanterns adrift in invisible tides. She whispered aloud, "Is this still the world I knew?" The island seemed to breathe slower. The air was heavy with a silence not quite natural. Even the gulls had stopped crying. Only the leaves of the silver trees continued to hum, though now the tune was different, slower. Minor, as if unsure of the key. Maren lit a lantern and walked down the cliff path, hoping to find something, anything that had changed. But everything looked exactly as it always had. And yet she knew in her bones this was no longer the same island. When she returned to the lighthouse, a surprise waited at the door. A letter, folded parchment sealed with a crescent moon wax stamp. It hadn't been there when she left. Hands trembling, she broke the seal. To the Keeper of Light, you have remained when others chose forgetting. The island has noticed. The gate will open soon. Watch the tide. Listen for bells. The cartographer of lost places. Maren read the letter again and again, her thoughts clouded with wonder. Who was the cartographer? How had they left this message? And what was this gate? She glanced back at the sea, where the distant blinking light still pulsed. Was it a signal or a doorway? As the night stretched on, her world felt both small and infinite. She climbed the stairs to the lighthouse chamber. Once more lit a candle beside the great crystal lamp, and made a vow. She would wait, she would listen, and when the bells rang, she would be ready. And far beneath the waves, something stirred, as if the sea itself had heard her promise. The island had always been quiet. Even when the wind howled or the gulls cried, there was a kind of sacred hush beneath it all, a reverence held by the rocks and the salt air. But now in this night that stretched like a forgotten dream, that silence had changed. It was no longer empty. It was listening. Maren sat on the lighthouse balcony with a blanket wrapped around her legs and the letter still clutched in her hand. The words, "Watch the tide," "Listen for bells," repeated in her mind like a lullaby written in code. She had no idea what bells to expect. Not church bells, surely not here in this forgotten place. But still she listened. The sea was smooth, almost too still. No wind stirred the surface, and the horizon blurred into the stars above like a mirror folding in on itself. And then she heard it, faint, distant, shimmering through the waves like a dream half-formed. A bell, not loud, not clear, but unmistakable. She leaned forward, straining her ears. The sound rang again, soft but resonant. It was not coming from the sky or the shore, but from below, from beneath the sea. Her breath caught. She hurried down the steps of the lighthouse, heart-thudding, not with fear, but with a strange kind of joy, like she'd just remembered a tune from childhood. The path to the beach was familiar, though now it seemed different in the eerie glow of the never-ending dusk. When she reached the shore, the tide was lower than she'd ever seen it. The sand stretched farther than it should, revealing jagged black stones she'd never walked upon. And in the distance, at the farthest visible edge of the shore, something was rising from the sea. It glistened like pearl, a structure, half arch, half shell, not made by any hands she knew. It curved upward from the ocean floor like the fossil of some ancient gate wrapped in seaweed, glimmering with barnacles and salt crystals. And from inside it, the bells were ringing. Clearer now. Still faint but layered, not one but many. Like a chorus of chimes swaying in invisible currents. Maren stepped into the wet sand, her bare feet sinking, the cold rushing around her ankles. She walked toward the gate, trembling with wonder. The letter had been true. The gate was real, and it had waited for her. As she drew near, the water did not deepen. The tide had pulled back completely, as if holding its breath. The gate loomed taller now. Elegant and impossible, and embedded in its center was a circle of light shifting like oil in glass, undulating gently. Her fingers itched to touch it, but she hesitated. "Not yet," she whispered, not without knowing what lies beyond. Just then, a new sound joined the bells. Footsteps. Behind her, she turned and saw someone standing at the edge of the dunes, cloaked in deep blue, holding a long, narrow lantern filled with stars. They did not speak, but the island did. A long, slow wind rustled through the silver trees above the cliffs, and the bell beneath the waves gave one last shimmering toll, louder than before. And Maren knew the gate had opened, but she would not be crossing alone. The figure stood still as stone. Maren felt the wind pause. Not die down, not fade, but simply pause, as if the island itself held its breath. The person at the edge of the dunes was wrapped in a long robe that shimmered like midnight silk. Their face was hidden by a hood, and in one gloved hand, they held a lantern unlike anything Maren had ever seen. It was long and narrow like a flute made of glass, and inside it drifted tiny orbs of light. Stars, it seemed, or dreams made physical. They swirled in lazy spirals, casting gentle reflections on the sand. Maren didn't speak. Neither did the figure. But the moment stretched thin, as if words were unnecessary or impossible. Then, slowly, the lantern-bearer lifted the glowing object and pointed it not at her, but at the gate. The meaning was clear. "Go!" Maren turned back toward the ocean arch. The lights within its center had begun to churn more quickly now, as if responding to the presence of both of them. The bells beneath the water rang again, their music richer, more layered, like an invitation unfolding note by note. She took one step closer. The sand was firm underfoot, the sea unusually still. But then her courage wavered. "What's on the other side?" she asked aloud, though she wasn't sure who she was asking, the figure or the island itself. A voice answered, Not from the figure, not from the sky. From within the gate. It was not loud, not male or female, not young or old. It was a voice made of echo salt and wind. Memory? Maren blinked. Memory. Your beginning. Your forgetting. And your truth. Her hands trembled. She hadn't remembered anything from before the lighthouse. No family, no arrival, no first moment. Just waves. Just light. She turned back to the lantern bearer, but they were no longer at the dunes. They were beside her, closer than they should have been. Silent. Still holding the lantern, but now extended outward not toward the gate, but toward her. She looked down. In their other hand, something shimmered. A key, long, delicate, made of a soft glowing metal that seemed to sing when it moved. Without words, they offered it to her. Maren hesitated, then slowly she reached out. The moment her fingers closed around the key, the entire island shifted. Not physically, but atmospherically, like a curtain had lifted. The silver trees rang with harmony. The gulls returned cawing riddles in strange tones. And the lighthouse beacon? Her lighthouse lit brighter than ever before, sending a shaft of gold through the unchanging dusk. She stepped forward. The gate awaited. Behind her, the lantern-bearer nodded once, then turned and vanished, not into the dunes, but into the mist itself, fading like the end of a story. Maren stood alone now, alone but no longer uncertain. She turned to the glowing archway and with the key in hand, stepped across the tide-washed threshold. And the sea opened, not like water parting, but like a dream unfolding. It was not water she stepped into. Not quite. The moment Maren passed through the shimmering gate, the cold tide vanished. The salt, the sand, even the pull of gravity, all of it faded like a memory slipping through fingers. Instead, she was surrounded by light. Not bright or harsh, but soft, luminous like the inside of a pearl. And sound. The bells had grown louder now, but they did not clang. They sang. Each note was a thread pulling her deeper. The world around her became translucent layers of shifting colors, like silk veils in slow motion. She did not fall nor swim, she drifted. Suspended in warmth, held by something gentle. And then the visions began. They weren't memories, not yet. More like shadows of memories. Shapes. Colors. Laughter. A lantern held by a younger hand. A fire in a glass chamber. A woman's voice lilting, kind whispering, "You must return before the tide forgets your name." Maren blinked, trying to hold on to the face that went with that voice, but it dissolved like foam. She floated downward, and then the world solidified. She stood, truly stood, on a path of glowing stones, suspended over nothing. Beneath her feet, darkness vast and absolute. Above her, a sky she didn't know full of unfamiliar stars. Before her, a doorway carved from obsidian, framed in ivy made of starlight. There was a sign etched into the stone, not in words, but in feeling a sense of returning, of unlocking something that had long waited in silence. She raised the key, unsure of what it would fit. But the door recognized her. It opened. Inside was not a room, but a memory. And not her memory, not yet. It was the island's. She stood on a cliff, but not the one she knew. The lighthouse was there, or a version of it, but newly built, shining in white, untouched by time. And there were people, dozens, perhaps more, dressed in robes of sea foam and ash, moving with purpose, placing strange stones in spirals, whispering to the wind. A ritual. They were building something. Not just the lighthouse, but the island itself. She turned and saw a younger woman at the edge of the gathering, barefoot, sharp-eyed, with hair the color of night surf. She was holding a lantern, not unlike the one Maren had seen in the hand of the silent visitor. The woman turned, looked straight at Maren, and smiled. It was her. Not a version, not a resemblance, it was her long ago. But how she reached out, the vision collapsed like a wave. She was falling again, not into danger, but into herself. And she heard the voice once more. You were never meant to forget. You were never meant to stay asleep. You are the last lightkeeper. The bells rang loud now, urgent, and then silence. She opened her eyes. She was back on the island. But the sky was burning violet, and the lighthouse was no longer alone on the cliffs. Shapes were moving at the edge of the mist, lanterns glowing in the distance. Others were arriving, others who remembered. And Maren knew without needing to ask. The island was waking up, and so was she. Maren stood at the cliff's edge, barefoot and wind-wrapped, watching the lanterns emerge from the mist like stars returning to a forgotten sky. They came in silence. One by one, the lights approached slow, deliberate, until their holders came into view. Figures cloaked in twilight shades, some tall, some stooped, each bearing a lantern shaped slightly differently. Some round, others long, a few glowing with soft silver, others in hues of gold violet, even ocean green. They did not speak, but as they arrived, they formed a circle around the lighthouse as if they'd been summoned by something older than words. Maren's heart beat not in fear but in awe. These were not strangers. They were keepers, like her. She could feel it in the way their lanterns pulsed in sync with hers, in the way the light bent gently toward the lighthouse beacon, acknowledging it as a kind of sun. One of them stepped forward, a tall woman with hair like frost and eyes deep as tide pools. She bowed her head, then spoke. "The island remembers you." Her voice was like a shell held to the ear, layered, distant, intimate. Maren opened her mouth to answer, but found her words caught in her throat. The woman only smiled and continued. "When the island began to vanish from the waking world, the first lightkeepers were scattered. Some forgot. Others wandered. A few slept. You, Maren, stayed." Maren's eyes widened. "You know my name." The woman nodded. "You chose to forget. It was the price of staying behind." Another keeper, a man with skin like driftwood and a lantern filled with moving ink, stepped forward. "Now the island wakes, and so must we." Around them, the silver trees began to shimmer again, their harmonies shifting richer, more layered, like a chorus that had been singing alone for too long and was now rejoining its companions. Maren looked at the lighthouse, still lit, still glowing strong. It had kept its promise, but now she was beginning to understand the lighthouse was not just a beacon. It was a lock, and her remembering had been the key. The frost-haired woman gestured for her to follow. "Come, the tide is not yet high. The heart of the island must be reawakened before it forgets itself again." Maren moved with them down a path that hadn't been there the night before. It wound through trees that bowed in silent reverence past stones that shimmered with runes too ancient to read. And then they reached it, a grove at the island's center. In its heart stood a pool circular, still framed by spiraling stones. At its center, a small platform carved like a shell on which rested a single object. A lantern, old, weathered, but glowing faintly. The woman looked to Maren. "Yours." As Maren stepped forward, the other lanterns dimmed slightly as if letting hers shine brighter. She reached out. Her fingers touched the handle. And the moment she did, the sky shifted. A new star appeared overhead, bright, pulsing, and unfamiliar. And beneath her feet, the ground hummed. The island was remembering everything. And for the first time since she awoke in that lighthouse so long ago, Maren felt the memory stir within her. Not just light, not just ritual, but a promise she had once made, and the cost of breaking it. The lantern felt warm in her hands, not hot, not glowing, but alive. It pulsed gently with each breath Maren took, syncing itself with her rhythm like it remembered the shape of her soul. Around her, the other keepers watched in solemn silence, not as judges, but as witnesses. She looked down at the shell-carved platform and saw her reflection in the pool's surface. But the face staring back wasn't the same. It was her, but younger, fierce-eyed, determined, holding a lantern just like the one in her hands. And beside her in the reflection, another, a boy. Maren gasped softly. His face rose from the water's memory, like the moon through clouds, freckled gentle with dark storm-swept eyes. He had been standing beside her once long ago. She didn't know how she knew, she just knew. "You weren't alone," the frost-haired keeper whispered, as if reading her thoughts. Maren looked up, lips parting. Who was he? The woman stepped forward slowly. "His name was Kale. He was your twin flame, your mirror, the only other who dared stay when the tides began to turn." The memory unfurled, unbidden. They had been young, not by years, but by understanding. 2 keepers left behind, as others left the island to fade. When the lighthouse weakened, when the gate began to fracture, they were told to flee. But they didn't. They made a pact, to stay, to protect the heart of the island until it could wake again. But the tide was stronger than they imagined. The forgetting seeped in like fog. And one of them was lost, not to death but to silence, to the sleep that clings to memory like vines over stone. Maren had remained. But she had chosen to forget because to remember was to carry the grief of failure. The frost-haired woman's voice pulled her gently from the vision. The island kept its promise even when you did not. It held your memory. It held his. Maren looked down at the lantern. The light inside flickered not steadily now, but like it was struggling. Reaching. Kael was not gone. He was somewhere beneath the surface of this night, still waiting, still dreaming. And she had promised never to leave him behind. Her grip on the lantern tightened. I need to find him. The wind answered first, soft circling, pulling the silver leaves into a new melody. Then the bell. Not the same ones from the gate, but a deeper tone singular. From far below the island's roots. A toll of awakening. The frost-haired keeper nodded. Then you must descend, alone. Maren stepped back from the platform, the lantern held against her heart. Where do I go? The keeper pointed to the pool, to the source. The water stilled, and in their depths she saw a spiral staircase glowing faintly beneath the reflection. Kael fell beneath into the dreaming layers of the island. Only the one who holds the core lantern may follow. Maren took a breath. Then another. The other keepers stepped aside. She knelt, touched the surface of the water, and it parted like air revealing the first step. 1 foot in, then the next. And slowly, lantern first, Maren descended into the memory beneath memory. To find the promise she had broken, and the boy she had left behind. The stairs were not stone. They were woven from memory. Each step Maren took shimmered beneath her foot. Flickering between solidity and dream strands of light threads of forgotten days, voices that whispered as she passed lullabies, promises, names half remembered. She descended slowly, the lantern held before her like a sacred offering. The light it cast was not ordinary. It pierced through fog that wasn't fog revealing scenes, just out of reach, like paintings viewed through water. A child chasing a kite of glass. A tower before it crumbled. A hand in hers, warm, real his hand. Kael? The name thudded in her chest like a second heartbeat. The staircase spiraled deeper until the weight of the sea was no longer around her, but inside her pressing gently, like a reminder, this is not the world you came from. This is the world you left behind. Then without warning, the stairs ended. She stepped into a chamber of stillness. There were no walls, no ceiling, only a vast open darkness stretching like the inside of a bell. At the very center hovered a single figure suspended in slumber, surrounded by hundreds of tiny lanterns, all dimmed, all flickering softly like sleeping fireflies. Kael. He hadn't aged. He hadn't changed. He floated in the center arms, gently outstretched palms open, as if still waiting to catch her. Maren took a step closer, her voice trembling in the silence. Kael, I'm sorry. She hadn't realized she would cry. But the tears came hot and unexpected, leaving no sound, only salt and light. She lifted the lantern. The others responded. One by one, the tiny sleeping lights blinked brighter, as if recognizing her presence, as if remembering her name. And Kael stirred, only slightly a twitch in his fingers, a soft shifting of his chest. Maren moved closer and raised the lantern to his heart. There on his chest was a mark, a spiral of glowing ink that pulsed in rhythm with hers. She didn't need instruction. Her soul remembered what her mind had long forgotten. She touched the spiral with the base of the lantern, and the lights ignited, not just around Kael, but across the chamber, across the dreaming island. A wave of light rippled outward, waking every shadow, every lost echo. The chamber rang like a bell struck from the inside, a deep, resounding hum of recognition. Kael inhaled sharply, his eyes opened. And the first thing he saw was her. You came back, he whispered as if he'd only just fallen asleep. Maren let out a shaky laugh. You waited. I told you I would. He reached for her hand. It was warm, real, now. The lights around them sang not in sound but in feeling, a reunion long delayed, a promise kept. And far above at the top of the lighthouse, the crystal beacon flared, sending a column of gold into the night sky so bright it pierced through the eternal dusk. The island had awoken. So had its keepers. So had she. Maren and Kael rose from the dreaming chamber, not by climbing, but by remembering the way. The spiral staircase unfolded once more beneath their feet, step by glimmering step, as if the island itself welcomed their ascent. Their joined hands were like a bridge between then and now, between forgotten and found. When they emerged from the pool in the grove, dawn had finally broken. or something like dawn. The sky above was no longer eternal dusk, but a bloom of pale silver and rose. It wasn't day as Maren remembered it, but a kind of awakening light, soft and endless, as if the island had decided it no longer needed night or day. Only memory, only presence. The keepers were waiting. They stood in a circle, their lanterns now glowing brightly, no longer pulsing, but steady flames of guardianship reignited. The frost-haired woman stepped forward. Her smile was warmer now. The heart of the island beats again. Kael looked around blinking. It's changed. You've been gone a long time, Maren whispered. Her voice cracked with something between joy and ache. He turned to her gentle and searching. And you stayed. She nodded. Not always. I forgot, for a long time. But you remembered, he said. She nodded again. Because you were still waiting. The other keepers approached slowly, reverently. One by one, they bowed their heads to Kael, not as a stranger's, but as one of their own, who had returned from a long voyage across uncharted waters. Then the frost-haired woman spoke again, her voice carrying a new gravity. Now that you both have awakened, the island must shift once more. Its place between memory and mist is not meant to remain. Kael furrowed his brow. What does that mean? It means, she said softly, you will have to choose. Maren's heart trembled. Choose, she echoed. The woman gestured around the grove, the cliffs, the trees still humming with windsong, the lighthouse beacon that still cast its golden light into the infinite sky. You may stay as caretakers of this memory. The island will remain visible only to those who carry true remembering in their hearts. Or, she hesitated, you may leave, return to the world that forgot carrying light with you. But if you leave, the island will sleep again. Perhaps for centuries. Perhaps forever. Silence settled among them like fresh snow. Kael looked at Maren. His gaze wasn't pleading nor questioning, just full of knowing, full of their story. She took a breath, and then she spoke. I was never meant to stay asleep, but I was also never meant to keep this light only for myself. She turned to the woman. We choose to leave, but not to forget. The other keepers bowed their heads, not in farewell, in blessing. And just like that, the island began to shift again, not crumbling, not fading, but folding gently like a letter sealed with light. The lighthouse dimmed, but its warmth remained. The silver trees shed their leaves, each one floating upward like stars, returning to their constellations. And the tide began to rise, not to erase, but to carry. Maren and Kael stood hand in hand at the edge of the shore, watching the mist roll in. It was not frightening now. It was familiar. And as they stepped forward into it, they carried with them the memory of bells, the glow of lanterns, and the love that waited longer than the night. They stepped through the mist as if through a veil of memory. And when it parted, they were no longer on the island. There was no salt on the air, no silver trees, no song of bells beneath the sea. Just a quiet field, wide, empty, soft with morning dew. And in the distance, a village nestled at the foot of a hill. The buildings were familiar in shape, but worn smaller than they remembered. The streets were still cobbled, the roofs still sloped, but something vital had dimmed in their stones. As if time had passed without anyone truly being there. Maren turned to Kael. Do you remember this place? He nodded slowly. I think we used to come here before. Before the forgetting. They walked toward the village, their steps slow, unsure. No one stared. In fact, no one looked at them at all. People moved past like ghosts. Their faces were not blank, but distracted eyes, fixed ahead, never to the sky, never to one another. Their movements were practiced mechanical. It was a world functioning, not living. Maren clutched her lantern closer. Its light was still there, golden and steady. But now it flickered in a different way, as if adjusting. Kael noticed too. It's dimmer here. It's not the lantern, Maren said. It's everything else. They reached the village square, once a place of music and laughter. Now it was quiet, though not empty. People sat in silence, eyes on dim screens, hands folded. A child clutched a toy, but never played. A baker sold loaves, but never smiled. A woman watered flowers that had already wilted. It was not despair. It was disconnect. Like the world had grown too quiet to remember its own heartbeat. And then the lantern pulsed. Just once, brightly. A child, the same one with the forgotten toy, turned. She saw them, really saw them. Her eyes widened. She stared not at their faces, but at the lantern Maren carried. "What's that?" she asked. Maren kneeled, holding it gently at the child's height. "It's a memory," she said, "one that glows." The child reached out but didn't touch. "Can I have one?" Maren smiled. "You already do." The lantern flickered again, and a tiny shimmer of gold drifted from it like dust, like light pollen. It landed on the child's forehead and sank in like warmth. The child blinked once then again, and smiled. A real smile. And like a ripple in still water, others began to notice. One by one, eyes turned. People blinked out of their stupor. Heads lifted. A musician touched the strings of an old guitar again. Someone laughed softly at first, like they were remembering how. Kale whispered Maren, "We're waking them." She nodded. The island didn't give us a treasure. It gave us a spark. That night, they stayed in the village. Not as strangers, not as prophets, but as keepers. They sat near the square and lit the lantern again and again. Not for show, not for spectacle, but for reminding. Each time the light pulsed, someone remembered something they'd forgotten, a lullaby, a face, a scent, a story from childhood. Maren sketched by candlelight. Kale played soft chords on an old borrowed lute. And when the stars rose, though dimmer than those above the island, they looked a little closer than before. Days passed, or perhaps it was weeks. Time in the village began to stretch and bend, no longer rushing toward deadlines or retreating into silence. It breathed now, like it had remembered how. Maren and Kale remained in the square not as visitors, but as roots. People came to them quietly at first. Then with more certainty, asking not for magic, but for meaning. What is this light? Where did you find it? Why does it feel like home? Maren always answered with the same quiet truth. It was never lost, only sleeping. And each time she said it, the lantern responded glowing slightly brighter, sending tiny golden motes drifting into the air. Those who received them seemed to stand a little taller. Speak a little slower. Remember the names of their grandparents, or the smell of their mother's bread. One day, a child, the first one, the girl with the toy, came running to Maren, cradling a jar. Inside a light, small, wobbly, flickering, but real. "I think I made one," she beamed. Maren gasped, not from surprise, but from recognition. The light was not a replica of hers. It had a different hue, more silver than gold, with a soft spiral movement, like a snowflake caught in candlelight. "It's beautiful," Maren whispered. "It's yours." And with that, everything began to change. Soon, others began crafting lanterns of their own, not with glass or flame, but with memory and presence. One man brought a stone from his childhood garden and sang to it until it glowed. An elder woman embroidered a handkerchief with her daughter's lullaby, and it shimmered in moonlight. Even Kale, quiet as he was, began to teach, showing others how to breathe light into wood, how to carve silence into music. The village became brighter, not with artificial glow, but with warmth. The kind of light that sits behind your ribs and glows when someone speaks gently to you. The kind that flickers when a story is told well. The kind that cannot be bought, only remembered. One evening, as the first stars crept back into the sky, real ones, bold and ancient Maren, climbed to the hill just beyond the town. She looked up lantern in hand. Kale joined her. He sat beside her fingers, interlaced with hers, their lights mingling in the soft grass. "You think they'll forget again?" he asked quietly. Maren didn't answer right away. Then, maybe, that's the nature of the world, to forget, to sleep. She turned to him. But maybe the point isn't to stop forgetting. Maybe it's to remember, just long enough to pass the light on. A pause. Then he nodded. "And if the island calls again," she smiled, "then we'll go. Together this time." Below them, the village glowed like a constellation returned to Earth. And somewhere far across the sea, deep in the folds of mist and memory, the lighthouse pulsed once. Not for help, but in gratitude. The seasons began to shift, though no one could say exactly when. Leaves grew more golden. The air turned crisp like the edge of a turning page. And still the village glowed, not always with lanterns, but with presence. People began pausing more, looking up, speaking slower, remembering names and songs, and the taste of tea after laughter. The children's lanterns multiplied first. They were wild, unpredictable, and utterly beautiful, shaped like animals spinning tops. Paper boats that glided across puddles without ever getting wet. They flickered not with fire, but with memory, the first snowfall, a lost tooth, a story told by candlelight. One evening, a small group from a neighboring town arrived. No invitation, no explanation, just drawn somehow by a feeling they couldn't name. They asked no questions, only watched wide-eyed as a little boy lit a stone with his laughter. "How long has it been like this?" one of them asked Maren. She smiled softly. "It's always been here, just unseen." Kael, meanwhile, had begun crafting a map, not of geography, but of remembrance. He carved it into wood with delicate fingers and deeper patience. Lines connected not places, but moments when someone remembered a lost friend, when a song returned to a voice after years of silence, when a grandmother told a story her daughter had forgotten. Each of these he marked with a symbol, a flicker, a light, and he called it the cartography of kindling. "It's not where people live," he said, "it's where they light up." Maren helped him finish it under a willow tree using ink made from soot and ash and lavender. It smelled like a fireplace after rain. One morning, before the sky fully lightened, the mist returned. Soft silver, not heavy, more like a shawl being draped gently over the shoulders of the town. Maren stepped outside and knew the island was calling again. Not an urgency, an invitation. She walked to the field beyond the hill and saw it faint flickering on the horizon, like the memory of a lighthouse that once stood tall. It wasn't fully there, not yet, but it waited. "It's never far, is it?" Kael said, appearing beside her. She shook her head. "Only quiet." They stood in silence for a while, listening to the wind move through tall grass like whispered names. "We could go back," he said. "We could," she replied. "But maybe not yet." "Why?" "Because now we are the lighthouse." Kael turned to her. His eyes, always full of salt and stars, reflected something brighter now. Trust. "Not in the island. In her." "Then we'll stay," he said, "until they remember too." And so they remained, not to guide, not to teach, but to be gentle reminders in a world always on the edge of forgetting. They tended the quiet. They watered the stories. They kindled the light in others' hands. And far away where the mist touched the sea, the island smiled. Because it knew, it started with a game. A child no older than 6 had asked if she could plant a lantern. Maren smiled, knelt beside her, and said, "Try." So the child placed her tiny creation, a teardrop of woven reeds and memory thread, into the soil at the base of the hill, where dandelions grew like silent stars. The next morning it had bloomed, a soft sprout, thin and golden, tipped with a glowing bud. Not hot, not fire, just warm. Within a week there were dozens. Lantern flowers, the villagers called them. Some grew from buried songs, some from kind words written in letters. Never sent some from silent forgiveness whispered into the earth. The field behind the hill became a garden of glow, not bright but gentle. The kind of light that heals tired eyes. And every evening, just as the sky turned the color of hush, the children would gather barefoot and breathless to watch the first ones flicker on. They clapped not in noise but in awe. Kael built a path through the field, not of stone but of polished driftwood, engraved with small swirling runes. When walked upon the runes, would hum, softly tuned to the mood of the traveler. If someone felt joy, the planks echoed birdsong. If they were sad, the notes turned to wind chimes. If they were lost, the song became a heartbeat steady and low. The path was called the Way of Light Feet. And soon even elders walked it barefoot, rediscovering the feeling of ground beneath skin. One old woman, after her 3rd quiet walk, simply said, "I remembered my father's voice," and wept, not in sorrow but in returning. Then came the night without lanterns. A storm, heavy, relentless. Wind tore through the valley, and rain fell sideways, pulling down branches, soaking every corner of the village. Maren ran from house to house, covering the garden with canvas and care. When dawn came, the storm was gone. But so were the lantern flowers. The field lay flattened, quiet. Children stared unsure. Maren stood beside them, soaked and muddy. No one said a word. Until a boy, thin and sun-browned, stepped forward with a crooked little lantern he'd hidden in his pocket. He planted it, right in the center of the field. "It's okay," he said softly. They were just resting. And in the hush that followed, the lantern blinked. Once, then again. And from beneath the mud, hundreds more began to pulse, faint but alive. Not gone, just asleep, like the island once was. That night, Maren stood at the highest point of the hill and looked up. The sky was full, not with stars, though those were there too, but with lights. Lights drifting upward. Not like fireflies, not like smoke. Like memories being released. She turned to Kale. They're sending them out? He nodded. It's time. To let the world know. No, he said. To let the world remember. The lanterns had begun to travel. Not by ship, not by wing, not even by word of mouth. They moved in stories. A traveler passed through the village, stayed a single night, and awoke with a strange dream. A hill lit with gentle fire. Children singing to flowers, a woman with silver-threaded hair, holding a beacon made of memory. He left quietly. 3 villages away, he told the story to a woman who no longer believed in stars. She made a lantern. She didn't know why, but she wept when it glowed. In another town, a baker who had long forgotten how to hum found herself shaping dough into spirals, the same shape carved in Maren's lighthouse steps. She baked them in silence. The scent filled the street, and someone passing by stopped and whispered, "This smells like when my brother and I used to chase the sun." The baker said nothing, but that night she lit a candle not for light, but for remembering. And it did. Back in the village, Maren and Kale began building something neither of them had spoken aloud for years. A new lighthouse, not tall, not on cliffs, but in the center of the village where the market once stood. They built it from driftwood and memory-inked stone moss-colored tiles and pieces of old lanterns gifted by children. It didn't shine upward, it glowed inward. A place not to guide ships, but to guide hearts. Inside, people came to sit, not to pray, not to wish, just to breathe, to listen to silence with company, to remember with others. On its tallest wall, Kale carved the old names of those who once forgot and those who helped them remember. And beside them, Maren wrote a line, "The island is not a place, it is a moment, and we carry it forward." And then one day, without warning, the mist returned. But this time it did not come alone. It spoke, softly, through wind chimes, through birdsong, through the scent of the tide. It whispered not in words, but in feeling. A calling, not for help, for inheritance. That night, Maren dreamed of the lighthouse again. The original one, high on the cliffs of the island, that blinked in and out of reality like a gentle heartbeat. She saw it clearly, and it was empty, waiting. She awoke before dawn. Kael sat by the window, already holding his lantern. "You too?" she asked. He nodded. "It's time." She didn't need to pack. Everything she needed was already inside her, in her light, her voice, her stories. They walked through the sleeping village. Lanterns flickered on porches like sleepy eyes. The new lighthouse glowed gently, like a parent watching a child sleep. And from the path near the hill, a soft silver fog had begun to roll in, not cold, not eerie. Welcoming. At the edge of the mist, a child waited. The same girl from the beginning, now taller, steadier. She held a lantern of her own. "I'll keep them lit," she whispered. Maren knelt and kissed her forehead. "I know." Then she and Kale stepped into the mist, one last time. And far away in the place where the world meets the sea, and the stars bend low to listen, the lighthouse flared awake not with alarm, but with recognition. The keepers were returning, not to stay, but to pass it on. The mist parted without a sound. Maren and Kale stood once more on the shores of the island, though it too had changed. The cliffs were greener, the air warmer. The silver trees had grown taller, and their song had deepened no longer lonely, but layered like a harmony of many voices joined in slow remembrance. The lighthouse stood ahead, unchanged in form, but different in spirit. It was no longer waiting. It was ready. They did not run to it. They walked hand in hand up the winding path that curved like memory itself. As they climbed, the wind greeted them in soft spirals, carrying familiar scents, sea salt and lavender driftwood, and dusk. At the top of the cliff, the door was open. The crystal lamp at the tower's heart was already glowing, not with urgency, but with welcome. They stepped inside, and as Maren reached the spiral stairs, something caught her eye on the wall beside the door, a carving freshly etched. Her name. And Kale's. And beneath it in smaller letters, "We remembered." They climbed the stairs one last time. Each step was a chapter, each floor a season, each breath a return. When they reached the lantern room, the view spread out before them, the island in full bloom, the sea calm, the stars above steady and still. Kael turned to her. "It's beautiful." Maren nodded. It always was. They placed their lanterns on the pedestal beside the great beacon. As they did, the crystal above them glowed brighter, absorbing, merging, becoming. And then without effort, it began to spin, slow, steady. A light not meant to be seen, a light meant to be felt, the kind that drifts between dreams, that glows in lullabies, that flickers in the quiet moments when you pause, breathe, and feel a warmth you cannot name. Maren and Kale sat by the glass, watching as the mist began to gather once more at the island's edge. "Do you think they'll find it again?" he asked softly. Maren smiled. "They don't need to." She placed a hand over her chest. "Because now they carry it here." Far away in the village of lantern flowers and silent guitars, a child told a new friend a story about an island that only appears at dusk. And the friend listened wide-eyed. "I want to go there," they whispered. The child held up a small glowing stone and said, "You already are." And in a world that still forgot, still hurried, still slept too long, a few souls paused, closed their eyes, and remembered the light, not because someone told them to, but because somewhere deep within, they never really forgot at all.